don't think they're coming to see me for some reason. I see some members from my club in here. I love it. Okay, so guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get started. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. And Mark, let me thank you again. This is now, I think, our fourth in a row week. Wow.
Yeah, we're having a great time with these. I'm enjoying them.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing it. So for those of you that don't know Mark, Mark is Dr. Mark Kovacs. He's wears many hats in the tennis industry. He has the Kovacs Institute, the Kovacs Academy. He's been a high performance coach with some player like top 10 players. He's worked with all kinds of people like at that level. He's been with the Gatorade Institute. He's been the USTA Sports Science Chair. So he's got a lot of credentials, and he does a lot, mostly in tennis, obviously, but not just in tennis. So, guys, today's topic is going to be backhand. Last week we dove into the forehand. This week we're going to dive into the backhand. And I think this week, and just so that you know, the way we'll do this, the format will be Mark and I will talk. I have some slides to share, and then we're going to answer a bunch of questions. I already got like over 100 questions on paper, and then, of course, people can ask questions in the chat. We will try to get through this in an hour. I don't think a 2-hour webinar is that cool, or less. So with that said, I think it's time for me to share my screen, and let's get this party started. So, so you can see on my screen now, I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger for you. This is all about the backhand. So last week when we talked about the forehand, I mentioned that as a coach, there's 6 checkpoints I look for. So when I'm looking at someone's stroke, I'm not just kind of looking for anything. I actually have checkpoints I'm trying to get through. Check it out. And I call them unit turn, load, explode, point of contact, extension, and finish. Those are universally accepted. I mean, some people might name these different. I think Dr. Mark has probably led the way in getting most teaching pros to have similar language here. So rather than talk, I'd like to show. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the checkpoints myself. So you can see we're on unit turn, that's number 1. And here we got Stan Wawrinka, and we got Grigor Dimitrov, a couple one-handed backhands. And all I'm going to do here, guys, is just tell you what I'm noticing. So here's what I noticed. Both gentlemen, their eyes are going forward towards the net. Their chest is clearly towards the camera. Okay, so this is a side view. And you can see they look very, very similar in this position. A couple things I notice is that the racket head, you see inside the circle, their left hand is up by the throat, almost exactly in the same position. And this is a little noticed thing, but I really want you to notice the wrist. Look at the wrist right there, and then right there. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second because I want to. So what I teach the one-hander, if I notice that somebody has a hump in their wrist, I know that's going to be a problem. It's usually because of a wrong grip or something. So no hump. And these gentlemen actually, not only do they not have a hump, they're not even level. They're almost inverted, like they're giving a motorcycle gasoline. So let me share my screen again to make sure you get that, because that's one of the things I look for immediately when I'm trying to help somebody. So look at that joint right there. It's inverted. It's not a hump there. So that's super important. Remember, this is checkpoint number 1, unit turn. So let's go to 2. Checkpoint number 2, we call it the load. And basically the outside foot, the back foot, is got all the weight on it. You can see these gentlemen, the foot's here, and actually notice that their front foot is unweighted. It's actually off the ground. And here it's back foot for Dimitrov, and barely he's moving that foot forward. So upper body looks pretty decent, but this is where they start pushing off that back foot. So we call that the load, or I do. Then we go to the explode. So now you can see, if you focus on their feet, now there is weight on the front foot. So in that previous frame, there was not, and now there is. And the other thing I like to point out here is the racket position, still very similar. But also look at this thing here where they're almost looking over their chin. Their chin is over their shoulder. It's really tucked in there. Very similar thing there. I found that's a very common thing. It's almost every good one-hander, I think, does that shockingly often. So that's the explode, and we're just showing how they're transferring their weight to the front foot, and also that little look over the shoulder move. Okay, the next one, we're going to go to contact. or explode, I'm sorry. So remember load, explode, that was, let me back up. That was part one. Notice right here. Part two is now you can see that the weight is not only in the front foot, but it's so much that the back foot starts to unweight. Right? So if we went through those, weight on the back, weight transfer to the front, and now weight off the back foot almost. Okay, and they have not hit the ball yet. So you can see the ball still in front of them. Okay, so that's, I really broke explode into two pieces. Let's go to this next one here. This is the contact. So there's a whole bunch of things I see in contact, and I got a lot of lines here, but you can see they've made contact pretty much in front of their front foot, Grigor barely in front of the front foot. The other thing I see is that their wrist, that hump, is not really evident. It's a pretty neutral position. Their eyes, to me, seem to be down at the point of contact. They're not looking across the net. And this arm, the hitting arm, is very straight at this point. Right, so those are the things I notice in the point of contact. And then we're going to go to the extension. So the extension is super important. We talked about that with the forehand yesterday. These guys, they're obviously, this is a one-handed thing. You can see shockingly how similar they are, right? They're both got beautiful one-handed backhands. But look at this arm, how straight it is. Super important that you go towards the thing. If you notice in the earlier screen, I say that the extension, at least with my students that I get in the court with, that's the area that they usually are a little weak. And then there's the finish. You see they're finishing over their shoulder. But I wanted to, these red lines are important. So here's what I'm trying to show you with the red lines. Their feet are, they're actually somewhat neutral or closed. The hips are opening up towards the net. The hips here are more facing the net than their feet are. And then as you travel up the body, the chest is even more, still more towards the net. So you can see even in this position, they got a bit of a coil. So look at the feet here. Hips are a little more open and the top is really open. So that's part of the kinetic chain, kinetic link. And then the finish, the actual finish, these guys, we're going to talk about the finish because I think a lot of times, you know, the finish can be very deceiving, and actually a lot of people believe that you should be trying to mimic what the pros do. And I'm pretty sure that if most of us got in this position here with the Grigors in, that's going to cause some physical pain. And then I had this next video here that's just funny, but it's to prove the point. So I'm a guy who has a lot of videos, pro videos online, and even myself, I don't think that your goal should be to copy the pros. Look at the finish. I just thought this would be interesting. Look at the finish here with Grigor Dimitrov at the very, very, very end. Okay, so how many of us could get in that position and still be alive, right? That's clearly not normal, okay? So although I do think there's a benefit to watching pro videos online, you get some commonalities, it's really hard. So then I'm gonna open it up. So those are the checkpoints, and I think Mark and I are pretty close on the same page. Mark, one of the questions that I actually made a slide because it was such a frequent question in the pre-submitted questions that basically it's what's up with the open stance and the backhands. So we talked a little bit about this with the forehand and the fact that it's a lot, but here you see all these, it didn't take me much effort to go online and just say open stance backhands, and you can see millions of them. I'm not sure this was all that prevalent back in the day, but I'll stop sharing my screen. Just wanted you to see this. And Mark, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, first off, great demonstration of how similar those one-handers were. Two of the best one-handers in the game, and you see the fundamentals are the same. The stylistic differences, there's a few stylistic differences that are obvious, but the fundamentals are consistent. Just like we talked about on the forehand and the serve, you've got to make sure you've got the fundamentals down. But specifically on the two-handed open stance backhand, it's a very common shot. The higher levels you go, the more common it becomes. And the main reason is it's a time issue. When players don't have much time, they have to go into more of an open stance scenario. You need to be stronger. That's the one reason why you don't see it as much at the recreational level, is because if you're a right-hander and you've got to get out to the two-handed backhand and you're going to be in an open stance, that whole left side of your body better be stable. Your hips have to be stable. Your glutes have to be strong. Your hamstrings and quads have to be able to handle it. Plus, you've got to have good core control to keep your upper body in the right position. Otherwise, you collapse, and that's what happens. Even at the top of the game, I use this concept a lot. I call it the circle of trust. There's a distance around every person that they're comfortable in. For a recreational player who doesn't move great, for example, they may be 3 feet. Anywhere from 3 feet from their split step, they feel like they can make solid contact. Then you go to a higher level player and it may be 5 feet they feel pretty good about. You go to the pros, it's 10 to 15 feet or even more they feel good about. But even a Djokovic, who arguably has the best backhand of all time, and especially his wide backhand, there is a point where you can make him uncomfortable. It's pretty far out there. It's past the doubles line, but there is a point where you can find him and it'll make it uncomfortable. But that's why, going back to your point about be careful about using pro footage as an example for recreational players. They can do things that most players can't do, and you have to be careful trying to copy them if you don't have the same physical skills or the training that they have.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And like you said, I know for myself, I love watching pro footage, especially the high definition, slow motion pro footage, and I have that. But I always worry a little bit that. So when I went through those checkpoints, I was showing you pros, and I think you can learn about the unit turn. That's something you can try to emulate. That wrist position they get themselves into, that's interesting. But when it crosses over and it's mostly about physicality, some of the stuff they can do, they're just freakish athletes that most of us just aren't. So it's going to be a little bit tougher. So guys, what I want to do here is the last few times that we've had these calls, we haven't gotten near, well, we probably will never get through 600 questions, which is, I think, about, we probably have like 300. And we're not going to get through those either. But I want to spend more time this week. That was my commitment. So it's about 15 after, 13 after. And we're just going to answer a whole bunch of questions. So in the chat, if you want to start asking, I see there's a bunch in there already. And then I'm going to read a couple of these. And then Mark and I will kind of take these one at a time. I will share something with you. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And Mark, at the end, I know you have a ton of unbelievable resources, so I want to make sure we share that with people. But one resource, I'll put the link here in the chat, but this is my free website. So this is a site that I put out, and it has all these instructional videos on all these different things. But for today's topic, you can go to Pro Analyze, and this is where a section where I basically analyze the different strokes, often side by side. Pro Slow Motion is also worth watching because you'll see some of the best players in the world, and they're doing it 240 frames a second, and that will be very revealing. But again, keep in mind, and of course we have Rafa and Federer and all the guys doing their strokes in here. So that's really worth, I think, watching. So let me go here. I'll stop sharing. I am going to right now paste that into the chat so you can go there. That site is 100% free. All right, let's go to one of my first questions here, Mark, that was pre-submitted. On the two-handed backhand, we covered this a little bit. Closed versus open. What should we be trying to teach beginners? Or don't we? Does the game itself teach them?
Yeah, so it's a great question about how much do you teach footwork and stances. And, as a pure beginner, you probably need to teach them something. You need to give them a guide point of where to be. So, normally a semi-open or a square stance is going to be the easiest option to start with. So that's normally how I always approach it. And then from there, the positions on the court will dictate whether you take them further than that.
Cool. I think another good question that came up. So we're talking basically backhands, but there's a lot of types of backhands. There's slices, there's approach shots, there's two-handers, one-handers, there's return. And this one has to do with the return. Maybe we can answer, it didn't specify, but let's try to answer this for the person, both on for one-handers and two-handers. And the question is basically what's the difference between a backhand return and just a backhand ground stroke?
So, yeah, really great point. It's similar on the forehand side. You're going to shorten it up normally, especially at the higher levels. You're going to have less of a backswing. You're going to use your lower body even more on the return than on the ground stroke because you're going to have a unit turn, a true unit turn, which is lower body and core and upper body all turning nearly simultaneously. And on the return, you have to coordinate those 3 segments really well because you don't have much time. So normally you're going to have a wider base. and that outside leg is going to push harder. And then depending on how much time you have, you may have to hit off that wide base, meaning you hit off your outside leg, or your outside leg is your plant leg, and then you take a step in and it becomes more of a close stance type of backhand if you're moving forward into the court. So again, you're trying to be as efficient as possible on all strokes, but specifically on the return because you don't have much time.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Probably the difference as I view it when it comes to a ground stroke versus return, it has a lot to do with the level, right? So if you're playing at an intermediate to low advanced beginner level, that serve is going to be coming at you probably not much faster than a normal ground stroke. So they almost look the same. But as you get to higher in those levels, you start getting to 4.0, 4.5 and beyond, that serve probably has more miles per hour and it's a little slightly different trajectory. So I think a lot of it has to do with the swing size. So as I was listening to you talk, Mark, I pulled up a video on my other screen. This is something I kind of, we're not going to listen to this whole video, but you can see here what in this video, basically, point of contact is 0. And you see these little lines here. I'm going to try to move forward. So this would be a full backswing, as back as it can be. And then this is 0.0, and that's the follow through. So what I'll do here is I'll put some numbers on the screen. And you can see when I take it back all the way here, that's a full backswing. And then this is where I hit, and this is a full follow through. So you can see the swing path, right? This back here represents your backswing. So 5, if my racket was way back there, is a full backswing. 0.0 is where I usually hit, and then that's the full follow through. So to answer this on the number scale, this is called System 5, by the way. So a full stroke would be 5 to 5. That's not uncommon. But on a return, especially if it's hard, it might be a 3-4. The backswing changes. Backswing, what I notice a lot of times is people receive a hard ball and they're not handling it well. They will, instead of cutting down the backswing and keeping the follow through pretty healthy, they actually keep the backswing huge and then they cut down the follow through. So they have this big swing, they block it. So really think about what level or what size of backswing you want. If my racket only goes, I'll just mute this and let this play. If my racket only goes back a little bit, okay, then that's a smaller number. But this is a good visual to kind of help you decide how to do that. And I think when it comes to returning, and I still teach a little bit, that's probably the number one thing. At the higher levels, I see pace starts to come in for a junior, for an adult for that matter, and all of a sudden they're not used to that pace and they fix it the wrong way. So instead of fixing it by taking a shorter backswing, their brain tells them, I'm late, so I better swing faster so I'm not late. And now they have a more wild swing and the ball's coming hard, so it's pretty explosive. It doesn't always work that good. So that's my 2 cents on the return and the need to do that. So here's the question. Can we explain the technical part of a slice backhand?
Great. Yeah. So there's 2 types, there's more than 2 types, but there's 2 broad types of slices. You have a knifing slice that, is the ability to come under the ball and you put excessive spin on it, which can be really effective. And that's what a lot of people hit nowadays. They hit more of that type of slice. And then a drive slice is a more traditional, longer stroke that if you look back at grass court players from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they hit this one a lot. So you have to really determine what you're talking about. And then you've got variations on the slice, which is a drop shot or a shorter slice where you take a pace off. But in general, if you separate your slice into 2 broad categories, the drive slice, which is more of a single-handed drive backhand with a little bit of underspin, but you're trying to be penetrating. You're trying to hit it relatively flat with not that much spin. And then you've got the real spinny slice, which is more of maybe a defensive shot or what players use a lot today because of their extreme grips. So you have to make sure you're clear on the 2 differences. But the slice is probably the most undertrained shot in tennis right now. But it provides so much challenge for so many players to hit against that it needs to be prioritized more in how we train it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to slice, that's one of my pet peeves. I think that somehow, especially with juniors and maybe even with some adults, slicing, the ability to hit slice is almost kind of like considered like a subpar shot. Like, wow, it's almost an embarrassment, right? Someone calls you a slicer hacker. That's not a compliment in our
And
sport.
I think you got to look at Federer as an example, Nadal as an example. Both of them use their slice to set up their forehand. It's one of the more productive shots that they use that doesn't get enough credit. When you watch their patterns of play, they hit this short slice. Both of them do it really well. Lands about the service line, tries to get the opponent to have to hit up on that ball, and then they're really looking to hit a forehand off the next ball. So that's a real strategic advantage that a lot of people at every level can utilize.
Yeah, I kind of use the phrase when I coach sabotage, and if the pros are using slice, which I think they use more than people realize, let's dive a little bit into this technique of slice, because I've always, as someone who teaches, I think it's interesting, and I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to pull up maybe the best slice ever. We see Federer here on the court. So what you'll see, I'm just going to have this go kind of slow. He's running to his side. Okay, then right here, when I see this, and when I view online videos, I don't come with preconceived notion. I'm just kind of looking, okay? But I noticed that Federer and a lot of guys, when they hit their slice, the racket head is actually literally behind their own head. You can see that happening right there with Fed. And then notice right here at his wrist, again, that position where the motorcycle is getting gas, the left hand way up on the throat, pretty common. So let's go forward a few more frames. And then now you can see he's coming down towards the ball. He hits, and let's look at this finish. So it's not full body, but you can see the finish kind of stays downish, and it didn't stop at the ball. He has some finish there, but it's definitely not wrapping around like a normal follow through. If this were to go any higher, probably the whole unit would come up. It wouldn't be necessarily flipping his wrist at that point. But the one thing that I noticed that's actually kind of helped my own players is when I can show them, here comes another one where he's approach. You see that position right there is just so interesting to me, where they get, let's go one more time, right behind the ear, like right there. I mean, if you just burn an image of that in your head, that's like the ultimate preparation for a slice. Again, huge risks given at the gas and motorcycle. So I always think that's kind of important. One thing I was taught, Mark, back in the day when I first was even introduced to slice, my coach would say, okay, Jorge, top spin is low to high, and slice is high to low. And then a better pro, or another way it was explained to me, I want to get your opinion, is that slice is actually not so much high to low, it's kind of high to level. And what do you think about that? Is that what really happens?
Yeah, so when you look at the best slicers of all time, I'd actually look back to previous generations. As good as Federer is, and he is probably the best slicer right now, you go back and you watch, the real great grass court players, they had phenomenal slicers, going back to Rosewall and Hode and Laver and Tony Roach in that era. That's when you're going to truly see unbelievable slicers. And like you mentioned, how they all learned was quite similar to what you just said. It was the tabletop. You would take your racket back and then you would slide it along the tabletop. And so it would be level all the way through contact and after contact. And that's such a good visual for players, or slide it along the net. If you're on a court, you use that as a guide. Your tip of the racket will stay on the net strap and the top of the net as long as you possibly can. 3, 4, 5 frames after contact. And that really makes it a much more consistent and reliable shot. It won't float, and you'll be able to get some pace on it as well.
Yeah, so Mark, this next question, I think I covered it in the videos, but I want to get your opinion. I call it giving it, I drive a motorcycle, so I call it that. But this cocking of the wrist, is that a thing? Am I just picking the right people, or?
No. It's a strength. It adds strength. So just think about a push-up. If you were going to do a push-up and you were going to push like that. That's normally how you recommend pushing, is with your hands like that. Imagine trying to do a push-up with your wrists like this and trying to push like that. You'd have no strength there. So that's the main reason. It's a pre-stretch. It's also a strength component to allow that wrist to be locked and then let the entire body go through. So a good slice doesn't use wrist at all. The wrist is locked the entire motion pretty much. It's really shoulder turn and hip turn, and then you drive through with that.
Yeah, I like that. That's helpful. Okay, great question here. I'm hitting a two-handed backhand. What's the role? What's the dominant hand? So I've heard people say it's really a left-handed forehand. Some coaches actually just literally teach, grab your racket, take away this hand, leave the last one choked up, and you'll smack some forehands. What's really correct? Is it really mostly left hand? Is it right hand? Is it even?
Yeah, so the best backhands of all time, you can put them into two categories. It is dominant hand, straight dominant hand, so it's a dominant right hand for a right-handed backhand, or it's a more dominant left hand. So you have both examples. For Andre Agassi, Novak Djokovic are a little bit more right-handed or dominant hand dominant on the backhand, straighter takebacks, and they're considered two of the best. But then you've got others that'll have a slight bend in that dominant arm. So there'll be a little bit of a bent elbow on the take back, which means the left hand for a right-hander is going to be a bit more of the driving force. Adding a bit more spin, if the left hand plays a larger role, like a left-handed forehand, you'll be able to get a bit more spin. But from a consistency standpoint, normally having a straighter dominant arm is going to provide a little bit more consistency for many players. So it's not a right or wrong. It's about where do you want your priority to be in the backhand. So some coaches prefer one over the other. But as we talked about in the other strokes, if you've got examples of both that have made millions of dollars and can hit that shot phenomenally well, you can't say one's wrong and one's right. It has a little bit to do with physical makeup. If someone, for example, Nadal was a right-hander, so you can see he's got, that right hand plays a big, big role, but he still has a very straight left arm on the take back. So normally from a preference standpoint at the younger ages and people learning, straight is better because there's less chance of making an error. There's less moving parts. So your arms are straight, you rotate and you hit. Take away as many variables as possible when you're trying to teach someone early on, or when someone's got an issue, someone's making a lot of errors, take away all those abnormal or normal components that may be throwing them off. So it's a really good question, and it's something that gets debated probably too much in a way. People get into the weeds on it, and we have to really stick with the fundamentals. Where do they get at? So when the racket comes here, so where are they at that point, and then where are they at contact? That's what's really important. If they can catch up to that position, they're going to be able to hit the backhand pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. That's helpful. This was a somewhat related thing. So I'd actually like to know your opinion on this. When it comes to teaching a youngster, so we're talking probably 10, 8, 9, 10. Is there any disadvantages to teaching the one-hander as far as possible injuries, or is it per player? What's any research behind that?
Yeah, so there's been a few studies looking at that and teaching young kids two-hander versus one, and injury risk in 10 and under is very low. It's the one age group where they can pretty much do anything, and their joints and ligaments and their body, their forces are so low at that point that the risk is low, whether it's single-hander or two-hander. That's why you don't see a lot of significant problems at that age. The challenge is when they get older, that's where some of the risk increases because forces become more and their bodies can't handle it. But again, it comes down to what does their technique look like? Are they able to stabilize? Can they hit an effective swing? And that's why you see plenty of kids who are 8, 9, 10 hit a single-handed backhand and do it fine. So don't force everyone into a two-hander. Typically, you'll know within the first month of watching a player play tennis, you'll get a good sense. Are they more naturally a single-hander or are they more naturally a two-hander? And you typically want players to do what they're most natural with. They're usually going to be the best at it.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I just had a coach call me for advice on that very thing. He said, I got a kid that, he's like 8. He's really quite good. He just feels awkward with his two-hander, and his coach was moving him to a one-hand and was a little concerned about whether that would be good.
You just got to be careful because odds are they're not going to hit it as well until they get to about 14 or 15. So they may have a few years where they kind of struggle on the backhand side a little bit, and that could impact how many matches they win and things like that. So there is a bit of a trade-off at those younger ages in some respects.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's super important. Here's one related to grips. I'll show you my opinion on grips, but as far as the size of grip, Okay, I haven't really. I believe that to me there seems to be a move at the pro level to go smaller grips. If is that true, and if so, why?
Yeah, so there's two big reasons why the grips have tended to go smaller over the last 5, 7 years. One is the strings have become looser on a lot of rackets. Players are loosening the string tensions, so you have to swing faster because the string tension is looser. The ball will fly if you don't have that high racket head speed to get enough spin on the ball. So that's why you're trying to increase racket head speed by having a smaller grip, which is a result of having looser strings. So it's a chicken and the egg. Is it the smaller grip that causes the racket speed to pick up, and that's why the string tensions have dropped, or is it the string tensions have dropped and people are now trying to make up for it by making the grip smaller? It depends. It's one of those things where it makes total sense because a smaller grip you can swing faster with. Think of it swinging a badminton racket with a small grip like that. Even if it was heavier, you'd be able to swing faster with it. Think about a golf club. Why does a golf club have such a small grip? You could justify having a golf grip the same size as a tennis grip. No one does because you want to swing faster. So that's the big reason behind it.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I'm going to share my screen because I think this might be a helpful thing. So remember, this site, Jorge Capistani, is free. And if you go to video lessons and baseline, you'll find this grips explained thing here. So what happened is I made this video. We're not going to watch it here, but this video will be extremely helpful to you if you want to know the best of all the grips, because I break down every single grip. We tell you where your knuckles are, what grip is good for what shots, the effect of the grips and the different strike zones. There's all kinds of really cool things here. So just a quick heads up, that is at Jorge Capistani, and I did that earlier. So let me unshare and go to our next question. This question is, in terms of the backhand finish, is there something preferred, swing straight up or over my right shoulder? I guess he's talking about two-handed backhand varying finishes. Oh, I think you're muted still, Mark.
Yeah, so finishes are a result of what stroke you hit. So I've never been a fan of teaching an outcome, which is the finish. You want to teach the cause or the swing that results in that outcome, because the outcome is going to change, and that you can see that in the pro game. I mean, very rarely does a player finish the exact same way in two swings in a row. Sometimes it'll be over the shoulder. Sometimes it'll be shoulder height. Sometimes it'll be just below the shoulder. Sometimes it'll be around by the hip pocket. Sometimes it may be over the same shoulder that they hit, like the buggy whip type forehand. So you've got to understand that the finish is a lot to do with the swing path. So focus on the swing path and let the finish be whatever is most natural for that athlete. If you overteach the finish, you're going to force an athlete into a certain type of finish that may not be appropriate for that swing.
Yeah, I think we covered a little bit last week on the forehand about that. I always say the finish is just how you're trying to make the ball behave. And I can pull up, or anybody can go online and just look at everybody finishing everything. On the forehand, you finish above your head. I call that pocket to hairdo, pocket to shoulder, pocket to pocket. And I think a lot of times coaches in my world will say, no, you can't, you should finish over your shoulder every single time. Well, if you watch 10 forehands on the tour, there's like probably 8 different finishes. So it's just kind of how you make the ball behave. Here's a good question that came up. I have a junior, two-handed backhand, and they're happy with that. Should they insist on a one-handed volley? So this is a little bit of a backhand volley question. We know the danger of having a two-handed backhand and never learning a one-handed backhand volley might stunt someone's growth. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so a little bit of level. If it's a recreational level, you may not spend the time and effort trying to get them to hit a one-handed volley. You may not. It may not be worth their time based on how they play and how often they're at the net and things like that. But if you're working on a player that's trying to play at a reasonably good level, you're going to want to teach 2 aspects of the volley. One is the swing volley. It's one of the more important shots in the game, and it has to be hit well. And then you want to teach a traditional volley, but a traditional volley may not be a you're balanced, you're set, you're able to hit a regular volley. You may not get too many of those in a match. Typically, what you need to teach is the stretch volley. So there's a lot of players out there that don't volley great, but they have a very good swing volley and they have a very good stretch volley on the single arm backhand side. But they're not really serving and volleying a lot. They're not coming in a lot. So you've got two options. One option is to swing when you've got time and you can, be aggressive, or you're trying to stab at a wide ball because you're out of position a bit. You've come in off a ball that may not have been the best ball to come in on, and now you're just trying to survive in the point. So those are the two types of volleys that you have to have, doesn't matter who you are. And then based on your strategy, if you're going to be coming in a lot more, then you have to round that out with a bunch of the other volleys in between. More of a body, a ball that comes at your body volley, a low volley, a high volley, all the variations. So the higher levels you play, you need all volleys. But again, it's a question of, how much time can you spend developing that if you are working with a recreational player that may take one lesson a week and play on the weekend.
Yep, I like that. All right, so we're going to stop some of these because I see that in the chat room we have a whole bunch of them. I want to try to answer some of these. About 1:37. We'll go another 20 minutes or so. So one question here, is there any difference? I don't think there is, but maybe in your research you come across it, for backhands from lefty to righty, or all pretty much the same, just opposite sides?
Yeah, so no, there isn't anything that's been seen that right-handers based on brain type or anything like that would have a better backhand or a worse backhand than lefties. So you can actually look and say, based on the numbers, there really isn't. There's the lefties that have good single-handers. There's righties that have good single-handers. So there's nothing that I've seen that would suggest that there's a real difference there.
Yeah. So this next question, I think we answered. It was the question about my motorcycle analogy. Why is that better? And I think Mark answered it because it's a matter of strength. If you got a hump in here, you couldn't be doing push-ups very effectively. So regarding the 6 checkpoints I went through, is this something that's more fluid and reacts? I find that teaching specific positions. So let me kind of answer that. The checkpoints that I use when I teach, I rarely tell the people what those checkpoints are because I don't want to engage them in paralysis by analysis. Same thing when I'm watching a student serve. I'm going through 9 checkpoints in my head, maybe even on my phone if I video them, but I'm not telling them what they are because there's just too many parts. So my answer to that is I use the checkpoints just to see if there's any breakdowns, and then I might bring them later and show them in a video and say, okay, here's what I was looking at. I noticed that your point of contact, your arm is way too bent, it's kind of far behind you, you got this weird look. But I don't generally explain all 6 and then say go because now it's in their head. I just want them to do it. So I think it's a fair question, but that's kind of how I do it. This is not a tennis question, but everybody is asking, will this be recorded and viewed later? The answer is yes. Everybody that registered will be getting a recording. I'll send an email. I think Mark will too. But I'll take care of that, Mark. Anybody that does it. And at the end here, Mark will give you some resources. He has an amazing website that has all kinds of stuff to do with fitness. And I mean, it's crazy. I joined it and we'll show you more about that. Okay, and Mark, you feel free if you see a question in here that you want to answer, we can take that. This is more, okay, your thoughts on, yeah. So what are your thoughts on the use and placement of the non-hitting arm? What are your thoughts about, is it true? It seems to me that when someone hits, well, let's just stick with the arm one, okay? And if it's a two-hander, it's going to be probably close up, and usually that left hand is in an eastern grip, which is up against the back of it. But what about, I kind of read in between the lines, think this is a one-hander. So what's the right thing to do with that left hand? Where should it be? Is there variance? What's the best practices?
Yeah, so the non-dominant arm plays a huge role. And it's important to understand its role. Its role is not so much in what it does, it's how it helps the rest of the body move. So if you keep the racket, from that standpoint, it allows you to rotate your hips better. So if it's a single-hander, for example, and you keep the racket on the arm on the racket longer, the hand on the racket longer, as you turn, you'll get a better shoulder and hip turn. If you release it early, you won't turn as much. So that's the main value of it on the take back. And then on the follow through, it plays a very important role because it actually balances you out. And if that arm really goes in opposite direction, remember what we talked about in the serve, you have an equal and opposite reaction to every movement. That's the equal and opposite reaction. As your arm goes forward to make contact, your non-dominant arm goes back. So on the single-hander, it plays a very vital role on both aspects of the swing. In the two-hander, it sort of is part of the stroke. So it doesn't really, you don't separate it out as much from that perspective.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Here's one. Are there any top pros now that use their right hand as a dominant? And you mentioned a couple. I thought you said maybe so. This is a two-hander using the right hand as more dominant.
Yeah, so I mean, Sharapova was a good one. Did it for many, many years. You know, when Djokovic does it. You know, he's got a very, very dominant right hand. So there's a lot out there that do. Nadal, from a lefty standpoint, does it quite well as well. And when we say dominant, it's how stiff and straight is that arm? Is that really doing a lot? And then when you accelerate through, depending on the stroke, they may adjust. So if you're trying to hit a short cross court and you're a righty, the left hand has to become more dominant. It has to come over the ball more. But if you're going to drive at line, what are you going to be as a priority? So there's a lot that are hybrid now. It's not excessively dominant or it's not excessively not dominant. It's depending on the stroke. So that plays a big role as well.
Mark, here's a good question about the kinetic chain. You know, how you kind of coil in our sport is very rotational. Is there any difference or things to consider in a forehand versus a two-handed backhand when it comes to the kinetic chain?
Yeah, so there is a difference in a forehand versus a two-handed backhand, because a forehand, your hands are separated, and so you're coming through with your hip this way, and your arm's usually lagging just a little bit. So there's a little bit of a difference there, whereas a two-hander, the hips and the upper body come together a little bit more. So again, it's minor. Do you have to coach it differently? Not necessarily. You can kind of use the same verbiage and the same coaching cues predominantly, but just understand, because of that separation, there is a difference. Your X angle, shoulder to hip angle, is going to be a little bit different. How much range you can get more range on the forehand than on a two-hander. You get restricted a little bit with how far you can turn. So all of those factors play a role in some of the differences. That's why most players can get a bit more spin on their forehand than they can on their backhand. That's one of the main reasons.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Here's a good question. When hitting a two-hander, what's the role? Like, how active are the actual wrists itself, or is it pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of two-hander. I mean, if you're trying to have a heavy spin two-hander where you're trying to dip the ball cross into the service box and bounce off the outside the doubles line, there's going to be more wrist engaged in a shot like that. If you're going to drive it pretty flat down the line, you're going to have hardly any wrist at all. So it's hard to bucket all two-handers and say what percentage of wrist engagement. There's been some pretty good studies. The Mayo Clinic did a study. I've reviewed 3 or 4 papers that have been done on wrist engagement in various strokes, and there's a huge amount of variability. So I would hate to give like a simple answer and then people realize that, hey, there's a lot of variability in that. The less legs you use, the more wrist you use as well, which is a big problem from an injury standpoint. If players don't get below the ball, what happens is they get the racket here. And I'll demonstrate it, righty. So when they get it here, they take the racket back and then they dip the racket like that. And that puts the wrist in a real compromised position. The more you do that, the more potential wrist problems you're going to get. And if your legs don't get below the ball, that's what's going to happen. You're going to drop your wrist to get below the ball. And that's why we see, especially at the higher levels, so many wrist injuries is because of that motion over and over again. And it's because players just aren't getting low enough and using their legs well enough, and they're getting lazy, really, is what it is.
It's actually interesting you say that, because when you did that move where you kind of, I actually see that a whole lot at all levels. I see good players doing that, where they kind of getting they put it down there thinking, I got to go a little high.
I mean, they were great players. I mean, you can just look at the ones that have had wrist surgery. It's public knowledge. You have CC Ballas, you have Del Potro. I mean, great players that have had wrist injuries, and you go back and you look at how much they did that. There is a correlation there.
Interesting. Here's a question when it comes to backhand slice, and it's about the depth around the slice. So I think I can try to answer this one for you. This is my view. Tell me what you think. When you hit a backhand slice, and we talked a little bit about how that looks like with veteran guys, I always say that slice is a family of shots. And for me, I think there's three types of shots inside that family. So a slice, what I call slice, is I envision the target. Think of it as the target on the other side, how deep it is. So when I hit a slice, to me, that means I'm trying to hit it deep in the court. I'm trying to hit it way back to the other side. And then another shot, another name for me, I call it chip. And for chip, to me, I'm thinking I want it to land around the service line over there. So I might do that, when someone's serving and volleying, I might chip my return. And then the last position I might want it to land on the other side is a drop. So if I want it to drop really close to the net on the other side, I would hit a drop. So they all start with the same prep, and then but there's three different goals. Slices, I'm trying to keep the guy back. Chips, I'm trying to keep it at his feet or maybe pull him in. And a drop shot, I'm trying to just totally pull him in. What do you think about that? Is there any mechanical or things that are different for those different types of slices?
Yeah, so I use basically the same terminology. So you're very, very similar in how you approach it. So a chip, you're going to have a very firm wrist. That's going to be a wrist doesn't really move. It's mainly a volley. I always equate a chip to very similar mechanics to how you would hit a backhand volley. Very little movement of the racket, trying to make sure you meet the ball out in front as best you can and use your opponent's pace to chip the ball, down normally or at the feet of someone who's serving and volleying, things like that. A drop, you're actually going to come under the ball a little bit. So there's going to be a little bit of wrist action, not much, but a little bit. And that's going to provide the backspin to get it to make it more of a drop shot type of feel. So, and then the drive, you're going to have a longer swing, longer backswing, and you're going to come through along the tabletop more, what we talked about, and a longer extension period. So agree with you 100%. And there's some very different technical aspects to those. And that's important to know the differences and how to teach those differences.
Yeah, I like that. Here's a good question. So we all know that one of the limiting factors of a two-hander is maybe your reach. So the question here is, I got a two-hander, I'm pulled way off the court, maybe past the alley. This is a recovery question. So what's the best way to recover when you're really been pushed out so far?
Yeah, so that's where the non-dominant hand usually comes into play, because the non-dominant hand has to kind of flick a little bit. If you're at a high level, your left hand for a right-hander is going to do the majority of the work on that really wide ball, because it becomes closer to a forehand, like a left-handed forehand, than anything else. So that's the upper body aspect of it. The lower body aspect is the outside leg. The left leg has to then brace and land as it comes down from your stroke. And then hopefully you can push off in one step to get all the way back, and using a front crossover more often than not. So that's kind of the process of it. Whether you're physically able to do that is another question. Many players don't have the skill to do that. So what they'll do is they'll kind of bump the wide backhand because they can't get a full swing on it. It's too wide. Then they'll take one or two little hop steps, which is what most people do that aren't strong enough or stable enough in the wide ball. They'll take a couple hop steps to regain their balance and their center of mass, and then they'll shuffle back. And that's usually what you see at the lower levels of players that aren't as physically gifted or have been trained as well to move the right way.
That's great. Here's a good question, I think. It's about one-handed backhands and possible injuries. What are some of the main causes of people getting tennis elbow? Is it more likely to happen to a one-handed backhand?
Yeah, so from a tennis elbow standpoint, if I'm here, you've got your elbow here. If you come through with a bent elbow and you lead with the elbow and then you straighten out like that, that's basically the number one reason for tennis elbow. Your elbow leads and then you try to straighten out to make contact. So you do that type of motion. That's going to cause the majority of lateral epicondylitis, the tennis elbow, which is on this side of the arm. So that's usually the major reason. The other side that could happen, even on a two-hander, is if you come across too quick and you try to put spin that way, So you do that too often, that can cause it a bit as well. It's not as prevalent for that motion, but this is the motion that causes it. That can also happen on a volley as well. So if someone's got a bad grip, they don't use the right grip on the volley, they maybe got a forehand grip on the volley and they turn the racket sideways and they do that. We see that a lot. That's another reason potentially for some tennis elbow type issues.
Yeah, I think that's kind of important. So, Mark, we're getting pretty far along. It's 150. Guys, if you have any extra questions, I'd put them in there sooner than later. I do want to share my screen and show you some. Mark and I have a gift for y'all. And I actually just put it in there. This video explains. Sorry, let me turn that down. So Mark and I put together a video or a video course that has all about tennis fitness. And we take one of the modules, this 10-minute workout at home. And this is actually a little mini course that you can get for free. And Mark actually takes you on the court. This is cool, given that we're all kind of stuck at home right now. We thought we'd make this part of the course free. And you'll be able to access it right through the link I put there. But basically, it's 10 exercises. You do each one for about 50 minutes, and you're done. It doesn't take all day. It's not like a major workout, but it's pretty clever. And Mark, if you don't mind, I know that some people, there's already one question in here. Could you tell us a little bit about all your free resources and what you have for players and coaches?
Yeah, no problems at all. Let me share my screen quickly. Okay, get that. So we've got a few different things available. This is the Kovacs Academy. This is sort of where we put a lot of our content. It's a membership site. This is the example here. It's the homepage. Kind of see our most recent things. Things are going up daily pretty much on this. We also have a blog. So if you go to the blog, that's 100% free. We update that weekly with a different topic of interest. So there's always some good stuff on there, and it's all searchable. You just go to this tab here and you can search by whatever it is you're looking for. And that allows you to put in serve, backhand, forehand, movement, fitness, recovery. We put some of the webinars up there. We have interviews, different things. So this is a really good resource. Then we also have our Kovacs Institute site, which you may want to go to as well. So kovacsinstitute.com, and that'll take you to our homepage. We do a few different things on here, but it's broken down as if you're a coach, you go to Coach Better. If you're a player, you go to Play Better, and then some of our other services that we offer. So this will give you a chance to kind of look through various things that we have. From example, from a Coach Better standpoint, we have a few different resources here for coaches. You know, from the academy side to courses. We have a Surf Specialist certification program as well. So a few different things that go on there. And then from a player standpoint, we have our player side as well. So there's a couple different things that people can take a look at.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think so many people, as a coach, guys, here's I really like for you to take it. Mark, did you put some links in there to the chat?
Yeah, I put a couple links in there, and I'll update those as well. So please reach out, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Yeah. So my concern as a coach is I work at a club. I still have students, and they come and they all want to get better. They all work hard. And when I look at their little game and like how they're progressing with their tennis life, I notice that they're taking drills, they're taking lessons, and rarely, I mean, almost never are they working on any mental toughness skills or any fitness. And those whole two silos, they just kind of tend to ignore. So Mark, without a question, has more effective content on that side, not only for coaches, but for players. So I totally encourage you to go in there. And maybe now during this time where we can't really, get to work, or have some extra time, that you can be researching this kind of stuff. It's a total no-brainer. So Mark, any parting words, and then we'll just kind of close this meeting up, guys.
Yeah, from my standpoint, it's more about focus on the fundamentals, try to simplify as much as we can when it comes to the backhand especially, and really have a good time with it. Let the style take the athlete to where they're going to naturally be. And then as coaches, we've got to work on trying to make sure that we deal with the fundamentals and don't overstep on the style side of things. And I think if we hold to that, we make better players that feel better about their game and improve faster as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. My parting words would be: make sure when the theme was backhand today. One of my words is always that people get addicted to technique. Remember the phrase range of acceptability. You shouldn't be taking 2,100,000 hours of private lessons, tweaking the heck out of your backhand. Let's get it set, get it good. Your backhand's going to look different than someone else's. Even the top 10 guys all have slightly different little things. So don't confuse style with substance, which is what Mark's big message is. And don't be addicted to technique. Get out there and start getting past technique. Now, obviously, if you have a technical flaw, yeah, get some attention, get a good coach that can help you with that. But I find way too many people are kind of in the range of acceptability, and they never move past strategy and movement and all that kind of stuff, and they're just mired in this whole world of technique. So, guys, Mark, thank you again. I really appreciate you covering all the time, being with all of us. We had great numbers again. So, guys, we'll see you on the next one. If we end up doing another one, we'll definitely let you know. But thanks so much, and thank you, Mark, and thanks everybody for listening in. Take care. Stay safe.
Take care, everyone.